Hi, this is Gary with MACMOST.com. Today, let me show you how to use percentages in numbers. MACMOST is brought to you thanks to a great group of more than 900 supporters. Go to MACMOST.com/Patreon. There you could read more about the Patreon campaign, join us, and get exclusive content and course discounts. Now I'm often asked about using percentages in numbers. So let's start with the basic math behind percentages. A percent is a fractional value based on 100. So let's say you had 400 people and 300 out of those 400 people preferred apples while 100 out of those 400 people preferred oranges. You would say then 75% of those people preferred apples and 25% preferred oranges. Where do those numbers come from? Well, if you take 300 and divide by 400 and represent it as a decimal value, you get 0.75. 300 divided by 400 equals 0.75. To get a percentage, you simply move the decimal place over 2 and add a percent symbol or the word percent afterwards. So 75%. Now as far as the math is concerned, it's still a value of 0.75. But the way we say it is 75%. They're the same thing, just two different ways of saying it. So if you want to represent, say, 9 out of 18 people, that's 50%. If you want to represent 250 out of 250 people, that's 100%. So it's important to realize that 100% is the same as saying 1.0. It's one whole thing. So when you say 50%, it's not really the number 50. It's 0.5 that you're using. So let's look at a simple spreadsheet that shows student grades on a test. Let's say the test had a total of 48 questions on it. And let's say the student got 42 of those questions correct. Now you want to compute a grade that's a percent. Instead of saying 42 out of 48, you want to give a percentage. So the way to do that is simply divide. You would start a formula. I'm going to hit the equals key to do that. You would take the number correct divided by the total. And the result will be 0.875. Now we can tell that that's 87.5%. But we want to actually show that here in the table. So how do we do that? You would do that simply using formatting. So I'm going to select the cell here and I'm going to go to Format, Cell on the right sidebar, and I'm going to change the data format from automatic to percentage. And you can see here it automatically changes it to 87.5%. I have some options here like the number of decimals. Here it's set to automatic, but I can change it to, say, 2 decimals and it's always going to show 2 decimal places. Or I can say 0 and it will always just round to the nearest whole number for the percent. Now you can also type a percentage. So normally if I wanted to type a percentage like 75%, you might think that I could type 75. But that will actually get me 75, a full value of 75, which is 75 times 100 would be the equivalent to 7,500%. What you want to do if you want to type a decimal is do 0.75. That's the equivalent to 75%. And now if I would go to data format and change that to percentage, you can see it is indeed 75%. But there's a shortcut to doing this. You can type 75 and then if you put the percent symbol after it, the numbers will convert that to a percentage. In other words, it will move the decimal place over to the left 2 and give you a value of 0.75. And in addition to that, it will automatically format the cell as percentage. So you see 75%. If I select the cell, you can see the actual value of the cell down here in the bottom left as 0.75. That is of course very important, especially if you're multiplying by that value. There's a big difference between multiplying by 0.75 or 75% or multiplying by 75. Now another common way to use percent in a spreadsheet would be to see how big of a percentage a single value makes up of a total. So here we have a list of values. It would be nice to be able to show next to each value how much of a percent of the total it is. So in other words, 5, how much does that represent out of the total of all of these? So it's just simple division and then setting the formatting correctly. So I could take this value here and then divide it by the total number of values. The way I could do that is by using the sum function, selecting the column there. So the sum of all the values. And now I get that there. If I select it and then change the data format to percentage, I get the percentage. Let's change it from automatic to 0. So there are 0 decimal places there. and that's approximately 6% of the total. If I were to copy that and then paste it in the rest, you could see that it's going to take the percentage of each one. So this is 4%, 8%. You can see here this large value represents 41% of the total. The great thing about this is it'll automatically expand. And so if I add another row there, you could see it's 0% because there's no value there. But if I add a number, you can see all the percentages change because now the total has increased by 20, and that decreases the percentage of each one of these out of the total. So it automatically recalculates. Let's add a big value here, and you can see that large value represents 49% and the other 51% split between the rest of these values. It's automatically updated. Another common use for percentages is when calculating sales tax on an item. You would commonly hear, for instance, that there's 7.2% sales tax on an item. Remember, that's not 7.2. That's moving the decimal place over 2. So 0.072. So if you wanted to calculate sales tax, like here's a sale for $50, you would multiply this not by 7.2, which will give you 7.2 times the value. You want to move the decimal place over by 2. So 0.072. So the sales tax on this will be $3.60. But you could also use the percent symbol in formulas. So we can multiply this by 7.2%, and that will automatically convert that to that 0.072. So you can see I get the same value there. If we look at the formula down here, we can see it maintains 7.2% as the formatting for that. So we can easily read it. We go into it. We can see it still says 7.2%. But that's the equivalent to 0.072. So if you wanted the total price, you can then go and add these two values together like that. But another way to do it is to calculate the total price without having the sales tax there. So let's delete this column here and calculate the total price, but using the sale price. And then we can either add the sale price again times 7.2% to get the right value, or the way a lot of people like to do it is multiply the sale price by the percent sales tax plus 1. So instead of 0.072, you would do 1.072. And you can see that gives you the correct value. You could even do it as a percent and say taking 100%, adding 7.2%, and then you get the correct answer there as well. Or you could just skip the addition there and do 107.2%. The sum of 100 plus 7.2 represented as a percentage, and that gives you the correct value as well. So those are the basics there. To summarize, percentages are just a fraction of an individual item over a total, and then you move the decimal place over 2 and say the word percent afterwards. So always remember the actual value is something like 0.75 when you say 75%. And don't try to use whole number values like 75 to represent percent. Use 0.75 and format the cell as a percentage. If you liked this video, click the thumbs up button below to let me know. I publish new tutorials each weekday. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out.